UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres has delivered opening remarks at the UN General Assembly focusing on climate change, global inequality and the war in Ukraine. Guterres blamed climate change for the recent catastrophic flooding in Libya and urged rich countries to phase out fossil fuels. He also urged rich nations to do more to boost the economies of developing countries. Addressing the war in Ukraine, he said the UN would not give up on efforts to revive a Black Sea grain deal. Well, the US President Joe Biden addressed the Assembly a short while ago, and he said the world must not back down in its support of Ukraine.
Russia believes that the world will grow weary and allow it to brutalize Ukraine without consequence. But I ask you this: if we abandon the core principles of the United States to appease an aggressor, can any member state in this body feel confident that they are protected? If we allow Ukraine to be carved up, is the independence of any nation secure? I'd respectfully suggest the answer is no. We have to stand up to this naked aggression today and deter other would-be aggressors tomorrow. That's why the United States, together with our allies and partners around the world, will continue to stand with the brave people of Ukraine as they defend their sovereignty and territorial integrity and their freedom.
Well, DW Chief International Editor Richard Walker has been following all the events there in New York and followed the Joe Biden speech here with me a little earlier. So, Richard, what was your main takeaway from Biden's speech?
Well, I think maybe the most interesting thing, or the comparison that I would draw between previous messages that we've had from Biden at the UN General Assembly last year in particular, is, although we just heard that strong message on Ukraine, that the Ukraine war is a principle on which the rest of the world cannot back down. It cannot simply allow Russia to kind of wait out this conflict, grind Ukraine down and succeed there, that the world has to stand against that. And yet it was very much reduced in terms of its prominence within his speech compared to last year. Now, last year, of course, September 2022, that was, just 7 months into the war. The war was still kind of fresher. And on that occasion, Joe Biden, in his speech, I counted there were 12 mentions of Ukraine, 19 mentions of Russia during the course of the speech. This time around, it was very much a kind of more compact message embedded within the speech, but a speech that was much more wide-ranging. And I think that reflects a consciousness on behalf of the United States, but also on behalf of other countries in Europe, that they feel that the rest of the world is thinking there's a risk that the Ukraine war is dominating the global agenda disproportionately compared to other issues facing the world, whether it's climate change, whether it's development, whether it's hunger. The West would say, well, the Ukraine war plays into a lot of those crises. But I think we saw from Biden there a consciousness that to kind of slightly reduce the prominence of the Ukraine war. But of course, we're going to be hearing from Ukraine's own president in the next couple of hours, Volodymyr Zelensky. It'll be very interesting to see how he is developing his message to the rest of the world. A very big opportunity for him, of course, to talk to the assembled world leaders there.
Well, you mentioned some of the big topics that Biden spoke about, climate change being one of those. And of course, in the United States, he's been a big advocate for change within industry, for example. And tell us a little bit more about what he said about climate change and what needs to be done. Yeah,
well, we can perhaps just quote just one clip from his speech where he said that what we've seen, he drew the connection, which Antonio Guterres, the Secretary-General of the United Nations, also did, linking in with recent disasters, like, for instance, what just happened very recently in Libya, saying that these are snapshots that tell what he called an urgent story of what awaits us if we fail to reduce our dependence on fossil fuels and begin to climate-proof our world. So I think a pretty strong rhetorical message there from Joe Biden, connecting to the disasters that the world is seeing now, to this need not just to ramp up renewable energy, but also to cut the dependence on fossil fuels. And in some international fora, like at the G20 just recently, there was talking up of renewables, but there wasn't this focus on the need to actually cut fossil fuels at the same time as ramping up renewables. So that is in part, I think, a coded message to countries like Saudi Arabia, like Russia, that have been blocking that kind of language on fossil fuels in international fora, saying, actually, fossil fuels absolutely have to be at the heart of the agenda of dealing with climate change.
Well, Richard, as you've mentioned, there were many issues brought up by Joe Biden, one being artificial intelligence. We'll speak a little bit more about that, but first, let's actually take a listen to what Joe Biden had to say on that topic.
Emerging technologies such as artificial intelligence hold both enormous potential and enormous peril. We need to be sure they are used as tools of opportunity, not as weapons of oppression. Together with leaders around the world, the United States is working to strengthen rules and policies so AI technologies are safe before they're released to the public. To make sure we govern this technology, not the other way around, having it govern us. And I'm committed to working through this institution and other international bodies and directly with leaders around the world, including our competitors, to ensure we harness the power of artificial intelligence for good while protecting our citizens from its most profound risk. It's going to take all of us. I've been working on this for a while, as many of you have. It's going to take all of us to get this right.
Well, Richard, obviously AI has been in the headlines, let's say, quite a lot over the past year or two. Many concerns as well, which, of course, he mentioned there. Tell us, what did you make of what he had to say on this? Is there anything new, really? Well,
I mean, obviously there are no specifics there, but I think it's certainly one of the major issues that the world needs to be facing up to at the moment. And if you draw parallels, some parallels are drawn to the emergence of nuclear weapons after the Second World War, and the fact that eventually the United States and Russia managed to come to arms control agreements where both sides managed to put limits on their own nuclear arsenals in the name of stability, and whether similar agreements are necessary for the much more nebulous world of artificial intelligence in the military sphere. But of course, the artificial intelligence has implications not just in the military, but in so many spheres. Some regions are actually ahead of the United States here. The European Parliament, for instance, has already brought in legislation beginning to deal with this issue. But I think we're going to be hearing a lot more about it. And Antonio Guterres as well, the Secretary General of the United Nations, also mentioned this, and he referred to the fact that he first mentioned this several years ago before it was really hitting the headlines. But a massive challenge, and if you consider the fact that the arms control agreements between the US and Russia over nuclear weapons have basically all withered and been abandoned, that doesn't give a huge amount of hope that the world is going to find a way in its very, very divided state now to deal with an issue that is inherently so nebulous and difficult to tackle.
Concerning stuff, Richard, to say the least. DW's Chief International Editor, Richard Walker, you'll be with us following all the events from the UN General Assembly today. Thanks, Richard. And let's cross over now to our US correspondent, Janelle Dumoulin, who's been following the events from New York City. Hi, Janelle, good to see you. So tell us, what else can we expect at this UN General Assembly today?
Well, as we heard there earlier, we're really waiting for the Ukrainian leader Volodymyr Zelensky to speak. Everyone is very curious to hear what kind of tone he will strike. What is expected is that he will thank all the countries assembled for their continuing support of Ukraine, but also try perhaps to put on a bit of a charm offensive for especially countries of the global south who throughout this conflict have chosen to perhaps pursue a non-aligned or multi-aligned foreign policy when it comes to Ukraine and the war that Russia has waged on it. So very interesting to see whether he will be able to charm them, to be able to recruit them more to Ukraine's side. Apart from that, President Biden, perhaps, we can see this as a signal of the U.S. trying to create more of an effort to counter Russia yet again. It is he's convening the first ever C5+1 summit with Central Asian countries. So think of Kyrgyzstan, think of Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, and Uzbekistan. So this is going to be a first as well. He's going to be sitting down with President Netanyahu of Israel. So that is also a tradition for the two men to meet whenever they are here at the UN. So they're just some of the things that are coming up at the Assembly.
And you'll be keeping a close eye on everything there, Janelle. Thanks, Janelle. Janelle Dumalone, US correspondent at the UN headquarters in New York.